Welcome to the Digital Marketing Insights podcast, brought to you by Brightside Digital.
Hi everyone, welcome to the show. I'm delighted to say today we have Mark with us, who's the Senior Manager of Digital Demand. Mark, how are you doing?
Hi Tom, how are things?
Yeah, very good, very good. Thank you so much for being on the show.
No problem, delighted to be here.
Brilliant. And Mark, we always start the show the same way. Could I get you to tell everyone just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So right now my role focuses primarily on driving digital demand for Pluralsight, just the company I work with at the moment. In a nutshell, I sit on the regional marketing team for EMEA, so ensuring that all of the digital marketing programs are aligned with the needs of the revenue and pipeline org within EMEA. So a little bit about me before that, I suppose. I've come from a marketing background. I did a BCom in marketing in Galway back in 2010. I further then did an MSc in business IT. And kind of my experience since then has been very much around B2B SaaS companies, so software as a service, running demand generation campaigns, digital campaigns from the ground up, working a lot on search engine optimization more in my earlier days. I've worked in companies, from 3 people up to probably 150,000 people. So I'll give you some examples. My very first company I worked with was a website, salthill.com in Galway. A lot of people might know where that is. There was 3 people on that team, including myself, and it was my first role out of college. So I really was learning with a baptism of fire about how to stand up, I suppose, a digital marketing motion, and really kind of driving my career from that start. I then kind of further progressed when I did my master's in Edinburgh. I was also working with a tech company there, where I was able to apply a lot of my knowledge from the master's degree in business IT across to the industry, and then vice versa, taking some of the real, day-to-day experience I was seeing working back into my university work. But that kind of teed me up in a way that I was growing my career in, particularly in the industry and the niche and the vertical that I wanted to. And then I further went on to work at Oracle in Dublin, where I was standing up, I suppose, demand generation for their CX app suite, so that their marketing and sales application products there. And that was really bringing together my digital marketing experience, but also working really, really closely with business development and sales, and really making sure that the programs that were being set up were in line with their revenue and pipeline goals. And then I started working for LinkedIn after there, again another big company, where I kind of jumped back into the digital marketing side of things again. So really driving their acquisition marketing for their largest product, which is talent solutions. And I suppose from there, that kind of gave me the rounded experience to where I am today. Really working with the sales and business development team primarily here in EMEA, and then figuring out from that perspective how we align with those goals with the digital marketing campaigns, and right down to the tactical levels then when you look into your paid and organic and social, etc. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. About 10 years of experience now in the space, so still learning every day, but that's me so far.
Brilliant. And obviously, I would normally ask what your strengths are, but really your strength has been in every area. Now you're very much focused on strategy. So can you elaborate a little bit more around how you go about identifying and creating a strategy for your team?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So I suppose from my perspective, I suppose the real value of where my role comes in is really being able to understand the needs and requirements from the business side within my region. So if I take EMEA as the region within that region, there's different segments that we operate in. So there's like strategic, there's enterprise and SMB. Um, each of these segments has natural targets and pipeline goals. So ultimately, what my role is to do is basically to understand what those needs are, understand what the expectations are of the business to bring through pipeline and opportunities from the marketing side, and then kind of translate that back to working with the global marketing team at Pluralsight, who help us build these programs. But in terms of the strategy very much comes from, looking at the business first. What does the business actually need? And then translating that back to whether certain markets that we operate in are more mature. So like we'll take, for instance, UK and Ireland would be our most mature market in EMEA. The touch on how we operate from a marketing perspective there is going to vary, very differently to some of our emerging markets where, our brand is less known or not known in many cases, and how we set up our marketing against those, can really vary. One of the things as well as part of the strategy is, are we focused on, demand generation, demand capture, or indeed awareness? I suppose the breakdown of how we focus on these will vary from region to region, but ultimately the strategy, feeds back into what the goals are, what the challenges are primarily, but then having, from my perspective, that knowledge of digital marketing, working with the individual channel managers who stand up the campaigns and helping them understand the needs of our side of the business in EMEA, but ultimately how we can align with business to achieve kind of the joint goals. So that's kind of how we, I suppose, build our strategy, and that's generally done. We look at that on a quarterly basis, but we have very, very regular catch up to make sure that, like spend is on pace, pipeline is on pace, and that we're ultimately kind of going in the right direction. So that's kind of that's how we stand up the strategy on the EMEA side.
Brilliant. And do you find when you're putting together the strategy, there's certain things that work in certain markets, and can you give an example of kind of platforms you're using at the moment that are working really well for some of your objectives?
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. Like I think with some of our more mature markets, I think a lot of our leads, I suppose, come through, first of all, organically. So we get a lot of leads and a lot of demand through like our contact us forms and our requested demo forms, ultimately because the market are more ready for our products and our solutions, and they kind of know about us. So we get a lot of inbound traffic that way, but we also have a lot of acquisition campaigns set up on LinkedIn and on paid search, so on Google, to try and scale out how we capture that existing demand. That works much better in our mature markets. Whereas when we look at like some of our emerging markets and emerging regions, we're putting a lot more focus into awareness, with the expectation that, look, we're not trying to drive leads into the team at the same volume as the UK and Ireland, say, for instance, just because people are not ready. So we need to focus on, education and their consideration of what products that they might need. They mightn't even know about our products, and that's what our role is, to try and figure that out. One of the softwares, I suppose, as you mentioned there, that we use, particularly when we're trying to identify intent in the market, we started using Demand Base to be able to help us, try and identify subsets of our audience. And the way that we can target there is we can target particularly. We use G2 data, so G2 is one of the most trusted, I suppose, product review sites. So we have our products up in G2 with decent amount of reviews and feedback from the community. we can feed in that traffic into demand base, and then kind of layer on what we're seeing in terms of the key terms that these particular people are searching. But ultimately, what we can do with demand base is build those audiences from third parties, and then feed those audiences directly into like LinkedIn Campaign Manager. We can feed them into Google, into Twitter, and Bing also, and Facebook. So we can then re-leverage those particular audiences for like, because they're kind of more top of funnel content. So, we leverage them with some video content or with like middle of funnel type content as well. Whether it be product led content or customer stories. And that's kind of how we, I suppose, bring in kind of the wider kind of audience and the kind of less mature audience, shall we say, from multiple sources that we operate across. So yeah, demand base is a big one for us. We've kind of really started into testing that in the last few months, and I think there's many other features that we haven't jumped into just yet, but we'll get there.
Is it fair to say then a lot of your work is lead gen and trying to get those potential emails and leads that way, and then you remarket and try and convert them software that way? Is that how you would market a lot
of
software?
I think I suppose, like, to be honest, over time we've kind of shifted away from just being very, very lead gen driven, where we know in many cases if we try to capture details too early, we'll scare people off, because generally, if they come into our system and they meet the, I suppose, lead scoring criteria where they come through as an inbound lead, in many cases they're not ready to speak to sales, and they're not ready to buy, let alone understand our products or anything like that. So this is where I see the main distinction between demand generation and lead generation, where lead generation in many ways is collecting those contacts, but what demand generation is really like the wider sphere. So are we looking to educate particular prospects with the idea that we'll retarget them in the future, and I suppose your audience management then really kind of comes into play, and how you think about your audience, because at the end of the day, when you're working with your business development team, you want to ensure that you're getting the best leads through to them, at the right time, to first of all, build credibility from an inbound marketing perspective, but ultimately help them hit their pipe and revenue numbers. Well, I think in many cases as well, why demand generation is so important nowadays is that people can get their information from multiple sources. You look at podcasts, you look at communities, internal like Slack channels, word of mouth. These are all the main marketing, I suppose, sources of knowledge, where there's not just so much focus that you can get your information from like a gated ebook, we'll say, for instance, where that might have been the case in the past. So we're trying to move as much as we can with how people consume information, how they select products and solutions. So that's kind of how we operate in a way. Like, there is that level of lead gen for those kind of middle of funnel, contacts, shall we say, and they convert much better when we target them in that kind of way. But ultimately, and depends on the size of your total of addressable market. If it's a volume play, lead gen might be better to get those contacts in. But if you're looking at a very, very small subset of the market, you've got to take a little bit of a different approach and really understand what makes your buyers tick, and what gets them, I suppose, excited about your products and solutions. So yeah, that's kind of what we're focused on, is moving just slightly away from just lead gen and into that more of a full circle type of demand generation motion.
Brilliant. And do you have any softwares that you use? You've kind of hinted on a couple there, but what softwares do you use to assist with your strategy and, I suppose, the business overall?
Yeah, I think so. Like demand, as I mentioned, demand base is a big one for us. Even things like I use Tableau quite a bit for visualization. I think Tableau helps me really understand the impact of our digital marketing campaigns in the lens of what that means into the individual sales teams and the business development teams, right back up to the campaign source, the campaign name, etc. So, for instance, if we're looking at, we'll take a region in particular. What Tableau helps me do is really understand what particular campaigns are driving leads and opportunities and pipeline into that particular regions, and then from that perspective as well, I can see which campaigns are performing better or worse versus like the expectations, and then from there that gives me the insight from the data to be able to go and reach out to those particular teams to figure out if there's any areas to optimize or if there's any issues in the campaigns themselves. But that for me in my role, that's probably the most important tool. When I look at a tactical perspective, I use LinkedIn Campaign Manager almost every day as well. We have we have a lot of focus on LinkedIn, particularly with their ability to target accounts and proper titles and seniority and company size. And it's obviously quite an active community. So LinkedIn is an important channel for us. So really understanding LinkedIn Campaign Manager and getting your head around all the different types of campaign types within that can be a long process, but that's where we see a lot of value at the moment.
Brilliant. And I suppose to focus on yourself for a moment, what is there anything you're looking at the moment that you're planning to upskill into, or how do you expand on your role and improve now?
Yeah, that's great question. So I suppose from my perspective, one of the areas that I kind of want to gain a bit more insight into is particularly around the operation side of the business, the marketing operation side. And I think that's one area that I think from my perspective, I can really add more value is understanding, like if we're getting in certain amount of inquiries or responses, shall we say, from acquisition campaigns, what does the journey look like when it comes into our system? What does the lead scoring models look like, and how we can use lead scoring more effectively for our regions? Even things like being able to understand how we optimize to like local titles, shall we say, or local job titles. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. I've got a decent amount of experience there, but I think really understanding that part of the business, I think is super important for understanding like the gears of how everything work, and being able to be, I suppose, a subject matter expert in that when you look at the full funnel. And I think it's something that I advise anybody in digital marketing who's looking to kind of upskill. I think really understanding what happens with your leads when, if you're primarily focused on getting leads into the system, I think understanding what happens through the systems and the scoring models and the routing models and how those leads ultimately get to, the sales development team or the sales team. I think that's something really important that I would advise that everybody should kind of have a handle on, including myself. And that's something I'm kind of working on at the moment to understand better.
Well said. And probably an additional part of that is, if you could look at the digital industry as a whole, is there anything that you think that's quite exciting or might help the business in the future?
Yeah, for sure. I touched on it earlier. I think, particularly looking to move away just from lead gen to demand gen. Like if you think about it, I don't know. I read a stat somewhere. I'm trying to remember where I read it, but basically, what the idea of it was that, and it makes sense from my perspective as well, is that about 95% of the people you speak to are not in a buying cycle. And ultimately, this is what demand gen tries to solve for: is how do we speak to that 95% of our market when they're outside of that buying cycle, and how do we stay relevant to them, um, rather than just hitting everybody in your addressable market with the same message and hopefully bringing people through into your sales funnel that way. um, I think the better that people and companies can align to how customers and buyers think and consume information in the next, in the coming quarter, shall we say, I think they're the ones who are really going to win, in terms of bringing in better qualified pipeline, and ultimately revenue. So that's something that at Pluralsight that we've been focused on for the last few quarters, as well as really testing into more awareness type activities, setting the mindset with your sales and business development team that there will be less leads that come through, but the reason there's less leads is because we're optimizing the leads that will convert much higher in future campaigns. So ultimately what you're looking at is more quality that does come through, that will convert much better, once it gets into the funnel. So yeah, that's the kind of trend I see happening in quite a few kind of innovative companies, and kind of what's happening in the market. And I certainly see the value, because we are running it ourselves, and we are seeing many efficiencies that come through that kind of way of thinking.
Really interesting. And Mark, lastly, we always try and understand the people behind the role a little bit as well. If you could bottle up one personality trait that you have and you could pass on to others, what would that be?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I've always been kind of really excited about is just learning. To be honest, I think it's one thing you can do that there is no downside to. I don't see any downside to learning new things and learning new perspectives. I think particularly as a digital marketer, where a lot of the role you rely on tech. Um, I think the opportunity um, is to kind of understand outside of the box where you can bring in more information and bring in new perspectives. So like I'll take one example here. LinkedIn Learning is a great resource, particularly for marketers. I think the subscription is relatively cheap for an individual user. But I think the information you can get there and you can learn is super important. Um, on LinkedIn, you can do a LinkedIn Campaign Manager course as well. I believe it's relatively cheap if you're not a Campaign Manager user. There's other like certs you can do, like there's the HubSpot inbound course you can do. It's free. Um, Also, what I'd look at as well is learning from podcasts as well is a super important one at the moment. I think if you look through Spotify, you'll find a podcast basically in every niche of digital marketing, and then you'll have like many great podcasts like this particular one, which looks at digital marketing as a whole and how that kind of feeds into the wider business. What I also look at as well, kind of sticking to that learning mentality, learn from people who, are in the roles that you would like to do in the future, and speak to them. Um, Generally, like if you're in digital marketing, you want to kind of branch out into maybe demand generation, or if you want to branch out into sales, look for someone in that role or someone who's done that step and learn from them. Um, but also, what I would suggest as well, like pay it back as well. Like, look to be a mentor yourself and mentor people who are coming up through the ranks, who maybe are they're fresh out of college, and they're in a digital marketing role, and they might have fresh perspective that can help, I suppose, bring that to you, bring that knowledge to you. Um, Other things as well, I suppose. Still sticking with learning, just um, yeah, just have conversations with people. If you get an opportunity to speak in public or to do a podcast, go for it, because the way I look at it is that if if one person is to learn anything from you speaking, that's a benefit, because you'll ultimately learn as well from them. So yeah, I think learning having the learning mindset is something really important to me, and that's something that I would recommend to everybody.
Completely agree. And what a wonderful way to end the show. Mark, thank you so much for being a guest. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And I'm sure everyone listening will love to hear what you've had to say. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity, Tom. I really enjoyed speaking today, and yeah, I look forward to listening back. But thank you again.